You're listening to the Fan to Fan podcast, and today we're talking about 1979's cult classic, The Warriors. All right, go with the nice cheesy intro. Welcome to the Fan to Fan podcast. This is your host, Bernie Gonzalez, and I am here with friend, fan, comedian, podcaster, man about town, Chad Lynn. What's going on, Chad?
Not a whole lot.
So The Warriors released February 9th of 1979.
The Furies, the Lizzies, the Boppers, the Turnbull ACs, the Rips. These are the armies of the night, 100,000 strong. They could run New York City. Tonight, they're out to get the Warriors.
It's a movie that's truly become a cult classic. So what is the movie about? The Warriors is about a Coney Island gang trying to make it home from the Bronx after being framed for the murder of the city's most powerful warlord named Cyrus. The movie is based on the book by Sol Ulrich. It was Ulrich's first novel, The Warriors, appearing in 1965, and it combined the classical Greek story of Anabasis with a fictional account of gang wars in New York City. So what is Anabasis? Anabasis is the most famous work of the Greek professional soldier and writer Xenophon. Happened around the year 370 BC. So the Greek term Anabasis refers to an expedition from a coastline into the interior of a country. So Xenophon accompanies the 10,000, a very large army of Greek mercenaries that's hired by Cyrus the Younger, who intended to seize the throne of Persia from his brother. During a battle, Cyrus the Younger is killed. That basically renders the actions of this Greek mercenary army irrelevant, and the expedition is a failure. Now that they're all abandoned in what was northern Mesopotamia without supplies other than what they could basically obtain by force or diplomacy, these 10,000 mercenary soldiers had to fight their way northwards through Armenia, making decisions about leadership and survival tactics along the way, while Cyrus the Younger's brother, who was named Arxerxes II, is basically sending his armies and attacking this group of 10,000, who are ultimately trying to reach the shores of the Black Sea. So with these literary roots, Sol Ulrich writes his first novel, The Warriors, and the film rights to the novel were bought back in 1969 by American International Pictures, but a film wasn't created. The rights were then obtained by producer Lawrence Gordon, who commissioned David Shaber to write a script. So Gordon sends the script to director Walter Hill with a copy of Sol Ulrich's book, but Walter Hill says, quote, "I would love to do this, but nobody will let us do it. It was going to be too extreme and too weird." Eventually, they took The Warriors to Paramount Pictures because they were interested in youth films at the time, and, well, the movie was greenlit in April of 1978, and The Warriors was in theaters by February of 1979. Paramount wanted to release The Warriors before a rival gang picture called The Wanderers, which was also based on a novel of the same name, but that was set in the 60s Bronx that followed a gang of Italian-American teenagers known as The Wanderers and their ongoing power struggles with another rival gang called the Del Bombers. And if you've seen The Warriors, you know that The Wanderers doesn't really have any similarity to Walter Hill's movie. And Walter Hill at the time had directed The Driver with Ryan O'Neal. He produced Alien, produced and wrote Aliens and Alien 3. He wrote and directed 48 Hours. He wrote and directed Streets on Fire, directed Brewster's Millions, wrote, produced, and directed Red Heat, one of my favorite 80s guilty pleasures with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he also directed 2 episodes of one of my favorite shows of all time, HBO's Deadwood. And more recently, Walter Hill directed the movie Supernova and 1996 Last Man Standing. But for purposes of this conversation, let's go back to The Warriors. So, Chad, do you remember the first time that you saw 1979's The Warriors?
I do. This is another one of those movies, this maybe more so than any movie that I had like when I was younger, it had a real reputation for being something that was almost like a rite of passage. Like seeing The Warriors, just it was like something like, man, that movie's so tough. It's so... And I saw it with a friend at a sleepover. I think there were a bunch of, whatever. God, how old were we? We're like,
Is this your friend Brian you mentioned in other episodes?
no, this is a different kid. This is Bob. And we had he had a
You had a
birthday-
lot of sleepovers as a youth there, Chad.
I did have a lot of sleepovers. My parents really just wanted me out of the house as much as possible. Understandable. It was one of those things where it was clear that the parents knew we were going to watch it. And it was just one of those things where everybody was trying to make it seem like a really big, like it was like, oh my God, this is so, but it's really not that taboo of a film in any way. Maybe it was because I lived in Lake Forest, Illinois, and I was in the basement of a home in a neighborhood where the average home in 1982 or 83 or whatever was already worth over $1 million, and it was just this weird thing where maybe that was it. Like they're showing us life on the streets or something. So my initial thing was that I was disappointed by The Warriors, and then I didn't watch it for a while, and I watched it a few years ago. And I wasn't disappointed by it. And then I watched it last week, and I actually really liked it. So it could be that The Warriors is the type of movie that grows and changes with you, or I could just be batshit insane. So it could be either.
Well, it's not necessarily a movie that's a realistic representation of the streets, as I do my podcast air quotes. There are not many Kiss-inspired gangs running around in baseball uniforms with bats as weapons.
No. Right.
I remember watching it on Fox, Channel 32 in the Chicagoland area as a kid when they would air movies at 5 p.m., so from 5 till 7 on Saturday afternoons. And that's when they would air movies like The Neverending Story, Labyrinth, Dark Crystal. Occasionally you'd get a Die Hard in there or Predator. But for the most part, they were movies like The Goonies, movies that were not necessarily 100% family friendly, but they had a bit of an edge to them. Mm-hmm. So that was my first experience with The Warriors. Having grown up in the city, I thought this is obviously not a very realistic portrayal of the gangs that I see in my neighborhood, in high school, around me on the news. But it's a really engaging and simple story, though. And I recognized that when I first saw it. And I think that's why, yes, it's a bit dated, but there's something about this movie that there's a reason why it's a cult classic. It is a bit timeless, if not a bit ridiculous with time.
Right, definitely. And it has its, it has its kind of really, that's laughably bad moments.
Sure.
But it actually is a pretty sleek, straightforward story. There's some brilliant exposition at the very beginning that is just so well done. I think another thing too, not to jump onto maybe a more controversial topic, but when I grew up in Lake Forest, which is a very wealthy suburb of Chicago, that was where I first started to recognize a certain level of racism in the society that I was a part of, that I didn't really understand. And The Warriors was somewhat important in the sense that it was a movie that we were all getting together and watching that wasn't just strictly a completely white bread cast. It was, that was showing you a life other than the one that we were in. And there were easily the coolest people in the entire movie are the Gramercy Riffs, right? That's their name.
Sure, yeah, that's them. As led by Shades, I think, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, the coolest people in the movie are those guys, and then the DJ.
Yes,
and they're all black.
Yes.
So when I was watching these kids be uncomfortable and not really or whatever, not that they were already racists or anything, but there was a certain level of uncomfortableness because clearly in their households there had maybe been discussions that were ignorant and just stupid. But I do remember that part of it being damn, those people are the coolest people in this movie by far. And and that's kind of the way I felt after I watched it last week too. I was like, God, I want to be in that gang.
Well, it was a good portrayal of gangs because if you think before that time, you had movies like White Heat and Scarface, but I mean not like Scarface with Al Pacino. Talking like Scarface with
Jimmy Cagney.
Thank you. Yes, him. So you have Cagney, but I mean they're all like these Prohibition era gangsters, right? So, or then if you move forward, the gangs then become these 70s biker gang movies, and then kind of into black exploitation movies. So the Warriors is very confident in having a just about all minority cast where a lot of the white characters become the minorities. And not just that, I guess on top of that, the fact that none of these characters are really heroes. They're not, heroes in the traditional sense, I guess.
Right. We're following like a gang that isn't as bad as the other gang. And that leads to this concept of like, this very interesting concept, I thought, that this is just the way life is on the streets for some people. They're not in gangs to be necessarily horrible people. There are gangs that are just slightly too aggressive groups of men running around, or like teens running around, that it isn't that difficult of a sociological thing to understand. And the other gangs, a lot of them are evil, obviously. It's just, I don't know. There was a weird, you're right, like a weird sort of like, okay, you guys aren't great. You guys aren't like the normal John Wayne hero, but in the same sense, you're less of a villain than most of the other gangs.
Yes, the other villains are much more like Black Cat type villains. You have all of this taking place in a future date at the time of the making of the film, a future date that's, I think, intentionally left unspecified, somewhere near the beginning of the 21st century, this period of extreme urban decay in New York. And from our recent conversations on John Carpenter, it's not as dystopian, as much of an apocalyptic sci-fi future as Escape from New York, but doing some research on it, that's actually the world that Walter Hill wanted the movie The Warriors to take place, not necessarily in late 70s, early 80s New York, but rather in this sort of almost like comic book world, because it does have at times this comic book aesthetic, almost these fantastic elements in there. But the way the movie is shot, and maybe this is more because of the cinematography by Andrew Laszlo, it has these Michael Mann anchors. Like the streets are always wet and it feels real, and the light, and there's something about it that doesn't make it look as fantastic as I think Walter Hill wanted it to be, but instead, kind of on the contrary, it makes it look real, except for the crazy gangs running around.
Yeah, that's it. It's an interesting visual experience watching the film, because there's some great use of color, and you can tell that they're going for something that they maybe didn't quite achieve, but it still looks pretty good.
Which is an interesting point. So the book, let me go back a little bit. The movie is actually based on a book by Sol Yurick. Did you ever read the book, Chad?
I did not.
I remember actually reading it in high school after seeing the movie. A few years after seeing the movie, I was probably in junior high when I first saw The Warriors, but seeing the book in the library and thinking, this is great, I'm going to read the adaptation of the movie, just to find out that it's very much not at all what the movie's portrayal of the book was. The Warriors in the book really means to be more just like the general sense of these gangs, that they're all warriors, but in the book, it's actually like the Coney Island Dominators, and they don't have as cool of a names as the guys in the movie. So you don't have Swan, Ajax, Cleon, and all this. But the overall essence of the movie is the same. You have a gang leader that brings everyone together, and in the book it's Ishmael instead of Cyrus in the movie. And he does do this kind of presentation talking about how, they are 60,000 gang members strong, and between all of them they can fight off the minority police and kind of take over everything, except in the book the police show up, and in crossfire of kind of containing all of these gang members, the police end up shooting Ishmael, the gang member, and it's the Coney Island Dominators leader, Father Arnold, who goes to Ishmael to kind of see if he's alive or not. Everyone thinks he did it, and then the rest of the guys, the actual gang, start making their way back home. But it has more elements of murder, and there's a gang rape in there. That scene where the Warriors in the movie run into the orphans, the kind of the gang that wasn't invited, and then that's their introduction to Mercy. After that scene in the book, they run into this guy on the street, just a random bystander who they kill as kind of like this show of force. And then they throw Mercy on top of the dead guy's body and gang rape her. It's a very different tone in the book than in the movie. So I just remember being completely surprised by it. And in the end, when many more of the characters die in the book, but at the end when they make it, kind of like the character that I think Rembrandt plays in the movie, who's kind of like the gang's graffiti artist. When he gets home, he finds that he like opens the door and his mom's boyfriend, they're basically having sex while he sees his infant sister crying unattended. And he just kind of goes to the fire escape, goes in like this fetal position, puts his thumb in his mouth and just kind of shuts down after the events of the day. But you have the sense that, this is their day, like this is the average day of one of these characters. I think that's what Sol Ulrich was trying to portray. And then when it got to the screen, it changed very, very much. You don't get a lot of that. And I don't know that those things would have ever made it to the screen anyway.
Yeah, that's, there's not a lot of family stuff going on in the movie, and you don't really see where these kids, how they were raised or where they come from, or even their lives other than being in the gang.
It's a simple plot. It's just, you don't get a lot of that. The backstory, you just get that introduction, like you said, that's so good. Hey, these are a bunch of gangs. We're going to follow this group in the Warriors, and some of them are really ridiculous when you see, what they wear, their costumes, their uniforms, but you don't really get a sense for, all these characters kind of caricatures. They're just archetypes.
Yeah, that's a good point. The beginning part of it, the exposition is done where there's like two distinct timelines. It's the Warriors and the other groups kind of jumping on the various mass transit systems in the New York boroughs to come to this enormous gang meeting. And at the same time, it's they cut back to the Warriors first kind of hearing about it and talking, right? Like they're like talking to each other about the meeting. So it goes to like them going to the meeting and then them discussing what the meeting is. And it's really shot and edited in a really like enthralling way.
And you get to know each character a little bit more. You find out a little bit about Swan, the war chief for the Warriors. And you see Michael Beck a little bit. He seems to be very serious. We get to see James Remar as Ajax, who seems to be the kind of like the jester, the joker, who's a bit unpredictable and has to be put in his place by Cleon, who's the warlord. He's essentially the leader who's leading the Warriors to this peace gathering in the city, with Michael Beck as kind of his second in command. But yeah, we get a little bit of each character. Rembrandt, who I mentioned before, is the gang's graffiti artist, tends to appear as the new guy. And they have to bring 9 members to this gathering, and they all have to be unarmed, but they're making sure to bring, the guy who can leave some evidence behind that the Warriors were there, so he can go through and tag anything with a W to let people know, hey, the Warriors were here, our presence has been made.
Right.
I want you to hit everything in sight. I want everybody to know the Warriors were there.
Do you remember, and this is jumping forward just a little bit, but do you remember how the woman...
Mercy. She's played by Deborah Van Valkenburg.
From
quite a name.
Too Close for Comfort, right?
Yes. And initially, Walter Hill wanted an all-black cast, but the studio did not allow that for quote-unquote commercial reasons. And he wanted that the character of Mercy to be played by a Puerto Rican actress to really represent what the demographic for New York was, but the actress Deborah Van Valkenburg convinced him enough that she got the role. And I think she does a really good job, and there is some chemistry between her and the character of Swan, so much so that, as I was kind of reading up, initially the romance was supposed to be between her and the character of Fox, and he ends up playing Windows in The Thing. So that character, so they were supposed to have a romance, but the Walter Hill and the rest of the production crew realized that there was an actual off-screen chemistry between Michael Beck and Deborah, and they shifted the romance between Mercy and Swan instead of Mercy and Fox.
Wow, that's interesting. That's really...
Yeah, the politics of acting in Hollywood, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are a few other little things I noticed. So with our previous conversation about Orson Welles, Walter Hill wanted Orson Welles to do the narrated introduction in the beginning and to talk about the Greek themes of the movie. But the studio didn't like the idea and they refused to pay for it. And that's how they brought in the idea of the DJ.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I never even thought about that from like a Greek storytelling aspect, the DJ being like the chorus. That's really interesting.
The music that plays a really big part, the soundtrack plays a big part of this movie, but the music that she plays just kind of keeps the momentum going, and it's done really well. And let alone the score by Bear Dvorak. The music is a bit dated, but the score holds up today. But it helps the pacing of the film, because essentially the film becomes a chase movie after everything goes down in this peaceful gathering that turns not so peaceful.
Yeah, the music, the score is fantastic. I second that.
In just a few seconds, Chad and I will continue our conversation about 1979's cult classic, The Warriors. But in the meantime, remember you can find the Fan to Fan podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan to Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN, or on Twitter at Fan to Fan Podcast. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out, send the message, and let me know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
So you have the main characters. You've got Swan, Ajax, Cleon, Snow, who is kind of like this quiet but very good fighter, especially in that bathroom fight scene. David Harris plays Cochise. You gotta love these names. There's Cowboy, Vermin, played by Terry Michos, and they actually wanted Tony Danza to do the role, but he was cast in Taxi, so he didn't make it.
Oh, wow.
You've got Roger Hill, who plays Cyrus, who's the leader of the Gramercy Riffs. And I was reading a bit on it, and they actually had a New York gang member, and they wanted him to play the role of Cyrus, but he never showed up for his day of shooting. So they kind of brought in Roger Hill, who does a good job, and there's a bit of a Shakespearean element in his speech delivery, which is really powerful. It really works out.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's really cool.
And then you've got David Patrick Kelly, who's Luther, who's the leader of the Rogues. And I think between Cyrus and Luther, they probably have the two big lines in the movie that have a life beyond the movie itself. The whole scene where he's just like talking to the gang members in Central Park and rallying them together, getting them psyched up.
Now there ain't but 20,000 police in the whole town. Can you dig it? Can you dig it? Can you dig it?
But then, of course, there's the scene at the end when they've made it to Coney Island finally, and you have Luther and some of the other rogues, his gangs, with him, and he's saying the line that is incredibly well known.
Warriors, come out to play.
But the actor, David Patrick Kelly, actually wanted to use 2 dead pigeons at the time, but Walter Hill, the director, didn't think it would work, so he improvised the whole clinking of the 3 bottles together. So just kind of a neat little bit of trivia.
That's great. That's really cool. Yeah, that's, wow. I would imagine also that there's got to be some joke to be made about how the gang itself is unique for any number of ways, including that they're the only people on Earth who are trying really hard to get back to Coney Island.
This is what we fought all night to get back to.
Why wouldn't you want to get back to Coney Island?
I heard back then. I heard it was not a good place to be. So,
well, you figured that it would have. This movie came out in '79, so that would have been 2 years after the big citywide power outage in New York.
Yeah,
and there was a day or two of blackouts, and there was looting and crime, and a ton of people were arrested. So this would have been 2 years after all of that. And I can see why, when the movie was released, it did okay in the box office, but I guess there were a lot of instances of gang violence, which makes sense in a way. It's a movie about gangs, fantastical or not, and it's going to probably appeal to active gang members, and they're all going to be under the same theater roof. So it incited a few fights that, of course, the studio had to kind of apologize for and tell distributors that if they wanted to, they could pull the film so as not to cause any more violence. But, it's like, all right, 2 years after these riots, this movie comes out, everything's supposed to be okay. Here we go again.
Yeah, I could just see the poor, I just envision the young kid who does all the retail jobs on The Simpsons, who talks like this, and
excuse me, Mr. Simpson, would you like your tartar sauce?
Right, exactly. We don't have a seat that'll fit someone of your, and then but to see that character taking the tickets, to the movie, and when a bunch of 6'5" guys come in dressed as the baseball gang with
oh, of course, yes.
The baseball bats. Hey guys, fellas, I don't think you should really be going in there.
Switchblades are not allowed in this theater.
Oh, I soiled myself.
But this comes out of my salary. If I had a girlfriend, she'd kill me.
So what'd you think after seeing this movie? Is this something that you've seen throughout your years? Just having watched it when you were younger? Have you revisited the movie? Do you own the movie?
I don't own it. I revisited it. Oh God, I want to say around 2008, something like that. And I liked it more than I did the first time I saw it. It was on TV or something, and I watched it and I liked it. And then the next time I watched it was this time, and I liked it a lot more than I had enjoyed it even the second time I saw it. There's just something about it that once you get past it's supposed to be such a tough movie, it's a really well made, quick little chase movie with good iconic characters, some excellent dialogue, some excellent acting, some really good camera work and direction. It's not a slow movie. There are certain parts of it that maybe you just kind of wish weren't there or something. But other than that, it's really good, and I think much more so than another film that we talked about, the futuristic Escape from New York. It paints a much more dangerous and but I like this movie. I like its portrayal of the city of New York as a place where anything can happen and it's crazy and there's graffiti and all that other stuff, much more than other films of its time.
And it actually has a little bit of heart. I think as a kid watching it, it didn't strike a chord with me, but watching it later and recognizing it and then watching it recently, the scene in the subway with Swan and Mercy, and they seem to be on the wrong train, or maybe the other couples are on the wrong train. And I think you know what I'm talking about. The two other couples that seem to be on a night on the town, and they're much more well-dressed and clean and proper, and they see each other across the aisle, and then you have the shot of Mercy trying to fix her hair just to have her hand kind of batted down by Swan as if to say, I like you the way you are. You don't need to change. But just recognizing that there's definitely a class divide here, that there's the haves and the have-nots, and the Warriors and Mercy come from a different place than these other couples that are enjoying a night out but are in a very different world. They're definitely not in the same world as the Warriors.
Yes. Yeah. They're giving you a lot of really cool information about the city and the structure of the city and the class system just in that little thing. It's very cool.
In a few seconds, Chad and I will conclude our conversation about the Warriors. But in the meantime, if you are listening on iTunes, please take a moment to rate and review. Just search for the Fan to Fan podcast, go under reviews, enter a star rating, or write a review if you have a second or two, and click send. That's how easy it is. I will greatly appreciate it. Thanks. So the movie features a lot of interesting gangs. I have a list of some of them here, if you don't mind me going over them.
Oh, please.
Okay. So we've got the Warriors. So they're the title gang from Coney Island. And they're brought into Central Park by Cyrus, the leader of the Gramercy Riffs, who kind of brings everyone together to have this big powwow to talk about how they can take over the city. But when shit goes down, they're pursued by a number of different gangs. So first off, you've got the Gramercy Riffs, which tend to come off as a very organized gang that are obviously very cool, led by Shades, the guy with the glasses. The Gramercy Riffs definitely come off as kind of like the alpha gang amongst all these other gangs.
Yeah, I agree.
So then you have the Rogues, Luther's gang. And that's something that, watching the movie again, Luther, at the very end, in that final confrontation at Coney Island, says to Swan, when Swan kind of questions him and says, "Why'd you kill Cyrus?"
Why'd you do it? Why'd you waste Cyrus?
No reason. I just like doing things like that.
Oh, yeah. He does that a bunch. Like, there's the one time where they're, like, buying. They go to, like, some little like, thing. And what does he say? Like, he, like, throws the money at him, and he says something that, again, just makes no sense.
No, he's very much kind of like an agent of chaos, but it's interesting because there are those two scenes where he's on the phone. So that scene that you mentioned after they're kind of like this like little convenience shop, he's made it a point to call someone on a payphone, and you never find out who it is or who he's speaking to, but he's essentially giving them a status update on where they are compared to where the Warriors are. So while all these other gangs are seemingly looking for the Warriors and they're using information from their street network or from the DJ who's kind of guiding them in certain ways so that they can stop the Warriors, all these other gangs are doing it to get attention, right? If we can stop the Warriors, dead or alive, we'll be known as the big gang, right? We stopped them, we got the people who killed Cyrus. Whereas you have Luther and his rogues who are going after them because the Warriors know the truth, but at the same time, it's like, who's Luther talking to? Is he reporting to another gang member, the leader of the Rogues? Is he reporting to, another alpha gang beyond the Gramercy Rifts that maybe we don't see? Is Luther an undercover cop? And he's doing this to kind of take down Cyrus and, what would be the coming together of all these gangs. There's just a lot of crazy possibilities of what it could be. A lot of things that are never defined.
See, that's interesting because I always thought that he was calling the radio station.
Okay. So just giving them a bit of an update on where they were compared to the Warriors?
Yeah, and just to kind of let the gangs know that, just to kind of keep the story going that the Warriors are still out there and need to be stopped. And like that sort of thing. Because there's a thing where obviously the Rogues want... They're letting the other gang stop the Warriors to kill them because it just looks better, I think, for the leader of the Rogues, who was the person who actually assassinated the leader of the Gramercy Kings. So yeah, so that was my take on it, was that they were like egging along, letting the other gangs know where the Warriors were.
Interesting. So then that would even make the whole gang network that much more organized. To think they have like kind of this central hub where they're getting information and then disseminating it through the music, through what the DJ is saying versus what she's saying versus what she's really saying, which is kind of in code. In a code that only the gang members can decipher, right? Something like that.
Right. In a code, because also just the names themselves are to a certain extent code that the average person who's turning on that radio station won't understand.
Okay, so then, all right, so let's think about some of these other gangs. You've got the Turnbull ACs, so they're the bald guys that ride around in that old bus. Gotta love those guys. The Orphans, who unfortunately are too small to even get invited to the big powwow, the big gathering.
You see what you get, Warriors? You see what you get when you mess with the orphans?
Probably the most famous visual gang in the whole movie is the Baseball Furies that are wearing kind of like this Yankee-style baseball uniform.
Yes.
But all completely decked out in Kiss-like makeup. And they don't say anything. They're just completely silent during their entire encounter with the Warriors and their gang.
Yeah, they're supposed to be very intimidating, but the thing that's funny about it is that then the Warriors just beat the crap out of them when they take their bats from them.
Yes, even after the one seemingly leader of the Baseball Furies does the cool thing with the bat, where he just kind of does it's just a nice slip where it kind of goes out of his arm, and you think, oh, this is going to be great. But it's like, no, kind of the contrary. It just turns into the ass kicking of the Furies.
Right,
so
exactly.
It doesn't work out very well in their favor.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I'll shove that bat up your ass and turn you into a popsicle.
Probably the gang that has the best luck against the Warriors is the Lizzies, the all-female gang that has a feeling of kind of going back to the Greek mythology, kind of like the sirens that enrapture some of the warriors into to their lair, to their headquarters, at least long enough to try to distract them from making their way back to Coney Island. And some of them, they're almost killed because the Lizzies, outside of having incredibly poor aim, almost like apprehend these three guys and almost kill them when they try to shoot at them, but then they escape. But the Lizzies probably have the best chance in the movie at actually like stopping a good number of the warriors and bringing them to the gang justice.
Yeah, I would think so too. That's really interesting.
Then you've got the rollerblade wearing punks, and they have the big throwdown in the subway bathroom. You've got the boppers. Is that right?
Yes.
I think that's about right. You've got the hi-hats, the electric eliminators, the Saracens, the Jones Street Boys, the Savage Huns, the Moonrunners, the Boyle Avenue Runners. I mean, seriously, just like amazing names for some of these gangs. And in doing research, I found that there were a number of gangs that were in the script that did not make it onto the screen. You ready to hear some of these fun names?
Yes, definitely.
The Amsterdam All-Stars, the Charlemagnes, the Colt 45s, the Delaney Rovers, the Dingoes, which were actually supposed to be a homosexual gang that were rivals of the Warriors, and in the original script, they actually captured the Warriors, but it did not make the cut. The Fire Tasters, you wonder what their gimmick would have been on screen.
That's awesome.
The Judas Bunch, just this great name. The Locos, the Meat Packers, the Nickel Steaks.
Meat Packers.
Yes, as the Go Hards.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Wow.
These are all real gangs that were in the official script. And here are some names that I made up, and hopefully you will enjoy some of these. The Vandals, the Daredevils, the Conquistadors, and the Savages. So I thought those were all pretty good names, right, that could potentially have made the cut. I mean, if the Meat Packers made the cut, I feel like the Savages could have made the cut, right?
The Conquistadors is great. I would love to have seen the visual manifestation of that.
Yes.
That would have been awesome.
A few others I made up. The Montagues, the Coffin Makers, the Beefsteaks, because I think that would have been good. The Simple But Warm, the Turtlenecks, the Dandy Warhols, the Oxford Commas, and the Real McCoys. I feel they would have been very authentic.
That's great. Those are great.
Yes. So, but those did not make the cut, unfortunately.
You never know what you're going to run into out there. If we're wearing our colors, we can't hide.
Who wants to hide?
So what do you think overall of the movie?
I like the movie more than I have in the past. The thing that I really find interesting about well, not that I find a lot of things interesting about it, but the thing that kind of like looking back on it is how like forbidden and supposedly dangerous it was and weird, but it's also it's a very traditional story. You're coming back home and doing whatever you can get there. And that movie's been made 1 million times, before and since. And so in a lot of ways, it's a very, very traditional movie, and I like it. I think it's good. I will say though, there are two things that bothered me about the movie. One, to the point that it almost ruined the entire film for me. The first one, which is not the really big one, is the name The Rogues, because it's a stupid name for a gang, because all gangs are rogues anyways. So it's just superfluous. It's silly. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. It would be like calling, if there was a new NFL team next year and the name of the team was the NFL team. Like it doesn't make sense. Or the highly paid professional athletes. Like it doesn't make. But the thing that seriously almost destroyed the movie for me, that I had completely forgotten about or blocked out or didn't have a strong opinion about last time, was the fucking use of In the City by the Eagles at the end of a movie that was in New York City. The Eagles are the ultimate California band. I don't like the Eagles. I don't like them at all, but that's neither here nor there. That's insane. This movie was about New York. It's about the streets of New York. It's about gangs in New York. It's about going back to Coney Island, and just because it ends on the beach, it's not the beach in L.A. It's the freaking beach of the Atlantic Ocean. Like, you don't, it's not, oh my God, that bothered me so much. I was like, why am I listening to this song at the end of this movie? Where's the Lou Reed cut that should clearly be there? Like, why is there the freaking Eagles in their peaceful, easy, loving, free, whatever in the city song? Like, when you hear In the City, you don't think about any city except Los Angeles.
Look, it's survival in the city, Chad. When you live from day to day, city streets don't have much pity. When you're down, that's where you'll stay. In the city.
Oh, God.
Well, the guy who actually did the score, Barry Dvorak, actually co-wrote the song In the City with the Eagles. So maybe that was the connection.
It's it's unforgivable to me. And you're right. And I remember when I heard it, I went, okay, I see that the words work to a certain extent in that really annoying, like, hey, let's sum up the entire experience in 4 lines. It was just that's not a New York song. That's not, it's the sunset in California. It's not the movie that we just saw.
It's a good song, though.
No,
I've been singing it way too long, and I'm sure I've been singing along, and my wife has been kind of tired of me singing In the City, kind of quietly to myself, and just to be like,
you're like cutting carrots for the salad, like,
yes, in the city. Come on, it's a cheesy song.
Oh, it's great. It's really funny.
Yeah, it all goes back to the Eagles.
God, you're killing me. You're killing
all right.
me.
Well, on that note, I think that's the Warriors. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Nice. That's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more fan-to-fan conversations on the Fan-to-Fan podcast. Thanks for listening.
Wait a minute. I can't go in there. It's a men's room.
Are you kidding?